told me it was final that afternoon. Your voice sounded lighter than before. You said the house was quiet now, and nothing pulled you back anymore. I waited for relief to find my chest, for something to finally lift. But the moment I rehearsed for months arrived already tired. You smiled like this was freedom, like the weight was gone. I stood there noticing what it wasn't. Divorce arrived too late to feel like hope. I stood inside the ending and felt empty, not close. Divorce arrived too late. The air stayed thin. I waited so long for a daylight. It didn't begin. You reached for me like nothing changed, like this fixed us somehow. Your touch felt unfamiliar and slightly rushed. The secrecy that held us together had already won sin. What felt intense in shadows didn't survive the morning. You asked if I was happy, asked if this felt right. I listened to myself answer you that night. The voice arrived too late to save the shade. We're waiting in the dark too long, couldn't stay. Divorce arrived too late, and I could tell that love exhausted quietly doesn't stay. If timing carries truth, this was it. I felt her waiting changes. Divorce arrived too late, and I stayed calm. I didn't blame the moment or the heart. Divorce arrived too late. forgiveness doesn't knock on the door it closed. It settles quietly inside, where pain once rose. I stop replaying every word you didn't say. I let the past loosen its grip and move away. You asked if time would change things, if I'd come around. I felt my answer forming without a sound. Forgiveness without return was the line I crossed alone to save my mind. Forgiveness without return, far clear. I didn't reopen what had been. I wished you well without a map, without a plan. I didn't stay to watch you grow into another man. I kept the softness I once gave, and maybe in mine I learned how mercy works best with the line. You said you hoped I understood what you meant then. I did, and still I love. Forgiveness without return, let me breathe. Set myself down gently and leave. Forgiveness without return was my way to stop carrying us every day. If peace requires distance, this is true. I kept my heart open, I clues in you. Forgiveness without return, and I stayed whole. I did like holding something almost good. You gave me pieces carefully, never the whole. I learned how partial warmth can still feel cold. I stayed for what was offered, not what was true. I filled the missing spaces with you. You said this was the best you had, said it would grow. I waited inside that sentence and stayed low. Half love stayed longer than I tried. I chose the quiet closeness over the side. Half love stayed longer than I fear. I held on to incomplete just to keep you near. I measured days by availability, by when you could stay. I learned how to call waiting away. We smiled like nothing was missing, like this was enough. I practiced believing even when it was tough. I kept my voice gentle, never asked for more. I stay inside the threshold of the door. You said things save patience, said timing was key. I watched my expectations leave me. Have love stayed longer, wore me thin. I learned how staying quietly can still give in. Have love stayed longer than I let in. I chose the almost feeling, oh, the regret. If something hurts slowly, it still hurts. I filled myself shrinking to fit your world. Have love stay longer until I knew the waiting this way was losing me too. Have love stay longer. I met a dead end. I fought the strength to rise. spoke about his marriage like something already gone. Said the house stayed quiet even when the lights were on. He talked in careful circles, never raised his voice. Said love had thinned a habit, not a choice. He mentioned separate evenings, separate sleep. Said staying felt easier than being deep. I listened more than questioned, let his words arrive. They sounded worn and honest and quietly alive. He spoke about marriage, soft and contained, like a chapter still open but already changed. He spoke about marriage with tired grace. I believe the space he described had a real place. Had a real place. He said arguments faded into polite replies. Said silence filled the corners where love used to lie. He told me he stayed careful for the sake of peace. Said leaving took longer than the grief. I watched his hands explaining, slow and sure, like he rehearsed the truth until it felt pure. He said nothing happened suddenly, just time wearing through. I felt myself leaning forward, believing him too. He spoke about marriage like the rule he left. I held the weight of his story in my chest. He spoke about marriage and looked relieved, like saying it out loud. Helped him breathe, helped him breathe. His honesty sounds gentle. It sounds like this. You didn't hear a warning. I heard try. He spoke about marriage and I stayed kind. I believe his leaving was all he'd said. He spoke about marriage like it was done. I didn't see myself entering what I'd become. I didn't see myself entering what I'd become. You spoke about marriage, and I stayed kind. I believed his leaving was only time. He spoke about marriage like it was done. I didn't see myself entering what I'd become. You spoke about marriage like it was done. I didn't see myself entering what I'd spoke about marriage. You came to me when evenings folded, when your voice felt warm. You spoke about weight and silence, and nights that felt long. You said holding everything together left you thin inside. I listened without interrupting and stayed by your side. You said it helped to talk this way, said I made it light. I felt your relief settle into the night. I became your shelter without a plan. I held the parts you couldn't carry as a man. I became your shelter, quiet and near. I stayed strong in the spaces you feared. You leaned into my listening like it was rest. Your sentences arrived heavy and laughed less. I learned the shape of your tiredness, the sound of your doubt. I kept the door open gently and let it out. You thanked me for being steady, said it helped you stand. I didn't notice how much I held in my hands. I became your shelter, stone and still. I took the storm from your shoulders by will. became your shelter night after night. I kept you warm emotionally. This is where I felt myself becoming your I became your shelter and stayed strong. I didn't see myself slipping alone. I became your shelter and held you through. Folded when your voice fell home. You came to me when held you through. I didn't know the shelter was leaving me too. I became your shelter and held you through. I didn't know the shelter was leaving me too. packed slowly on purpose, counted every fold. I let my hands remember what my heart already told. Nothing shattered in the room, nothing rushed me out. I stayed present with the leaving and the quiet doubt. You watched from the doorway, said you understood. I nodded without answering, like I should. I packed slowly to stay kind. I didn't run from memory or rewind. I packed slowly, piece by piece. I let the ending arrive in peace. I chose which days to carry, which to leave behind. I folded moments gently out of time. The wall felt less familiar with every step. I noticed how much strength I kept. You said you hoped I'd be okay, you said you cared. I felt the truth arrive unsaid. I packed slowly without blame. I didn't ask you to explain. I packed slowly to stood tall. I felt myself return through it all. Fear needs control this step. I felt my center hold and lift. I packed slowly and didn't break. I stayed with every breath I took. I packed slowly and walked away. I didn't lose myself that day. Late messages felt important after the day went quiet. Your name lit up my screen like it asked for silence. You typed in careful sentences, never rushed, never bold. Said nights were when you could think, when truth felt old. Your words arrived like company when the world went thin. I stayed awake longer to let you in. Late messages felt important, your voice without sound. I read between your pauses and stayed around. Late messages felt important, the dark felt kind. I learned how closeness forms between the lines. You said the house was sleeping, said you finally had space. I imagined you speaking softly in another place. I kept my answers gentle, never asked too much. I noticed how attention can feel like touch. You thanked me for listening, said I've helped you breathe. I mistook grief for what you needed from me. Late messages felt important, your honesty near. I held your vulnerability like something dear. Late messages felt important, my guard stayed low. I didn't aim the direction, you started to go. Tennessee has footsteps, they sound like this. Quiet conversations I didn't miss. Late messages felt important, my nights grew wide. I built a place for you inside. Late messages felt important, and I stayed awake. I didn't feel the cost yet of what we'd make. I realized I was a pause, not the place you stayed. A moment where you rested before choices were made. You leaned on me between chapters when life felt unsure. I was the silence you needed, not the future you chose. You said this time mattered, said it helped you breathe. understood what that meant. Quietly, I realized I was a pause in your life, not the answer, just the quiet. I realized I was a pause, temporary space. I held you while you waited to move away. I wasn't written into tomorrow, only the gap. I softened your leaving and steadied the map. I carried weight that wasn't mine and called it love. I stayed so you could continue once things lined up. You thanked me for understanding, for being kind. I accepted that role as mine. I realized I was a pause, and it hurt to see that your healing required less of me. I realized I was a pause and stood still. I didn't argue the truth, I never will. Causes teach movement, this did. I felt the shape of leaving begin. I realized I was a pause and let it be. Chosen by you, I realized I was a pause and stepped away. I didn't disappear, I stayed. What began in shadows felt fragile once the door stayed open. The intensity we protected didn't know where to go then. Your voice sounded careful now, less certain than before. I felt the quiet thinning where he'd once lived. You said love just needed time to learn the light. I watched the darkness fade and lose its fight. Shadows felt fragile under the sun. What felt invincible came undone. Shadows felt fragile, open and bare. I stood beside you fully and felt less there. You spoke without coded language, without doors to close. Nothing felt forbidden, nothing pulled us close. I noticed how the silence changed when nothing hid, how mystery once holiness quietly slipped. He said this was adjustment, said we'd adapt. I felt the truth thinning in the gap. Shadows felt fragile and open air. I missed the closeness we shared there. Shadows felt fragile once exposed. They felt the weight of ice in the fold. If only secrecy survived, this was where it lost its life. Shadows felt fragile, and I could see where lived in hiding couldn't breathe. Shadows felt fragile, and I stayed still. I didn't blame the daylight, I never will. I noticed something on your hand when you reached for light. A circle catching afternoon, too calm, too bright. You moved like it meant nothing, like I wouldn't see the weight of someone else's life touching me. You kept talking through the moment, your voice stayed smooth. I stayed inside the sentence and the truth. Someone else's rain between our words. I felt the pause arrive unheard. Someone else's rain, cool and small. It said the things you wouldn't call. I watched it mark your movements every time you spoke. A quiet signal circling the hope. You smiled like nothing shifted, like I stayed the same. I held my breath and learned its name. You said it didn't mean much, just history. I felt the present thinning quietly. Someone else's ring resting there. I stood beside a promise couldn't share someone else's ring, steady and thin. I felt the line I'd crossed sinking. Can shine silently, this did. I saw the future near where I stood. Someone else's ring, and I stayed calm. I didn't speak the fear. Step softly into someone else's hands. Someone else's ring. Someone else's hands. Dressed fell thin between my hands, like paper worn by use. I noticed pauses in your voice that didn't used to bruise. I watched the timing of your replies, counting minutes I ignored. I felt myself preparing for something unspoken before. You said nothing had changed, said I was safe. I listened to the space between your face. Trust fell thin without a tear. Nothing broke, but nothing held here. Trust fell thin, quiet and slow. I stood inside, but maybe you wouldn't show. I asked myself instead of you when questions came. I softened how I spoke to avoid blame. I noticed how reassurance needed proof, how promises felt lighter than truth. You said I worried so much, said this was new. I felt belief in it as it held. Trust fell thin, and I stayed kind. I didn't ask for certainty this time. Trust fell thin, and I withdrew. I felt myself stepping back from you. Trust fell thin. Trust fell thin, and I withdrew. I felt myself stepping back from you. You were unfaithful in small ways, never loud or cruel. You left conversations unfinished and called it truth. You shared your heart selectively, kept the rest aside. You leaned on me emotionally and returned inside. You said nothing crossed a line, said you stayed fair. I noticed how intention isn't care. Unfaithful in small ways, day by day. Nothing shattered, just worn away. Unfaithful in small ways, soft and slow. I felt the cost before I knew. You kept your vows intact on paper, but not in tone. You gave away attention that wasn't your own. You made room for honesty, but only halfway. I learned how absence forms while someone stays. You said you never in harm, said this was life. I understood the pattern that night. Unfaithful in small ways, that touch I didn't need to see nor proof as such. Unfaithful in small ways, and I knew that staying longer would undo. This betrayal whispers, this was how. I heard it clearly now. Unfaithful in small ways, and I'm done. I don't carry this forward when I run. Unfaithful in small my dignity and peace. crossed a physical line. Never said too much. Your hand stayed careful, out of reach, out of touch. Still something moved between us every time we spoke. Your heart arrived in pieces and quietly broke. You shared the parts you hid at home, the way you couldn't say. I felt devotion forming in a different way. Unfaithful without touch, without a trace. Your thoughts stayed with me in another place. Just hearts leaning forward where they shouldn't have been. You looked relieved when I understood, when I stayed near. You spoke like honesty alone made it clear. I carried your confessions through ordinary days. I felt your absence from someone else's space. You said you weren't doing anything wrong, so lines were still intact. I learned how truth can fracture without a crack. The distance blow at home where you didn't go. Unfaithful without touch, your voice stayed kind. I stood inside at a closeness you couldn't define. If loyalty lives in presence, this was crossed. I felt the weight of something taken before it was lost. Unfaithful without touch, and I stayed still. fear. But faithful without touch, and I could see how love can leave a marriage emotionally. Waiting turned into routine without warning signs. I knew which nights you'd answer. By the time I planned my evenings loosely around your calls, I stopped asking questions and filled the walls. The hours lined up quietly like chairs in rows. I learned how patience works when nothing grows. You said this phase was temporary, said it would change. I nodded while routine kept its place. Waiting turned into routine, soft and plain. I learned how hoping daily feels the same. Waiting turned into routine, no surprise. I watched anticipation close its eyes. I answered faster than I needed, just in case. I kept my tone available in every space. I stopped marking weekends as my own. I felt how repetition feels like home. I stayed prepared for maybes that never came. I learned how waiting learns your name. You said you appreciated me, said I was strong. I felt the days repeating long. Waiting turned into routine and wore me down. I kept my feelings folded, safe and sound. Stayed still, I practiced being present against my will. Against my this was it. I felt myself living inside it. Waiting turned into routine, and still I knew that staying right always wasn't true. Waiting turned into routine, and I could see Waiting turned into routine until I know, but staying ready always wasn't true. Waiting turned into routine, and I could see we tried in daylight for the first time. Your hand rested lightly in mine. The street felt louder than before, like everything could see us. You smiled but didn't stay long. Your eyes kept scanning the room. I felt the shift without words. The dark no longer held us. You said it felt different now, but maybe better too. I listened for conviction and didn't hear you. We tried in daylight without hiding. Nothing pressed us closer than timing. We tried in daylight, faces clear. I felt the distance growing right here. We talked about ordinary things, as if grounding helped. Your laughter wiped carefully and left itself. I noticed how we caused more between every thought. The intensity we borrowed run out. You asked if I felt strange too. Said guess would adjust. I nodded while the magic lost its trust. We try in daylight, open and bare. I stood beside you fully and felt less there. We try in daylight, nothing wrong, just something missing. This was where we went wrong. We tried in daylight, and I could see what felt alive in secrecy, losing heat. We tried in daylight and stayed collide. I knew the ending quietly that night. You check the time again, like you're mad and now your keys waited patiently in your palm. You stood a moment longer, said you should go. Your voice stayed gentle, like it always did, though. You said tomorrow softly, like a promise you knew. I nodded without answering, and I watched you move. You went home to her, like you always do. I stayed where the evening ended with you. You went home to her. The streets stayed wet. I stood still and listened to you drive. I learned the sound of leaving by your routine, the jacket, the pause, the space between. I stayed calm on the surface, never asked why. I let the ending repeat every night. You said this was complicated, said nothing changed. I felt how repetition wears pain. You went home to her, and I stayed near. I held it quiet afterward, like fear. You went home to her, no door slammed shut, just absence learning where I goodbye becomes routine, it still cuts. I felt the weight of choosing and not being enough. You went home to her, and I stayed kind. I carry the part of you, it stayed behind. You went home to her, and I could tell believing this way was its own hell. like it mattered now. Your keys awaited patiently in your palm. You stood a moment longer, said you should go. Your voice stayed gentle,